I am a serial entrepreneur. I have started a whole bunch of businesses in different parts of the world, in Europe, in Silicon Valley, in Toronto. I've taken a company public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And I have one sort of giant learning out of all of the things that I've witnessed over the years. I've seen climate get worse. I've seen water issues. We've seen poverty increase. Literally every time I look out the window, this is what I feel. Everything is broken. But I'm an entrepreneur with a very positive outlook on the world, and so there's a second part to this sentence always. Everything's broken. What a great time to be alive. If you are a creator or a maker or an entrepreneur, this moment in time is your nirvana. Literally, walking down the street, you can find 10 or 12 things that just need fixing, that need to be rethought. We're living in a world that was designed for a whole other time, and we need a totally new upgrade. So, one of the things that I think is most broken is our mindset. Right now, we have a mindset of winner takes all. Winner takes all is when we have a competition and one person wins. There's one hero at the end of the story. There's one person who makes it all happen. But this is very rarely how anything happens. And the challenge of winner takes all is it's led to the world where 5 people, 5, have the same wealth as half the planet. When I started SheEO a few years ago, 3 years ago, 85 people had the same wealth as half the planet. Last year it was 62, and now it's 5. This is a result of a world gone wild on what winner takes all, and we really need to shift it. And if you remember 2008, this is a little bit of an economics lesson here, but it's going to get more interesting. If you remember 2008 when the markets crashed, we found $17 trillion in 3 weeks to bail out the banks. $17 trillion, which is such a crazy number. What does that even mean? That is actually equivalent to 600 years without hunger on the planet. We found that money in 3 weeks. There is so much money out in our world. It is just unfortunately held in the hands of 5 people and accumulated into these small pockets, which is really creating havoc on our economy. We need a whole new approach. And if it's bad at that top level for everyone, it's super nasty for women. If you're a female entrepreneur, 4% of venture capital goes towards female entrepreneurs, 4%. 4% of loans from banks go to women-owned businesses, 4%. Less than 1% of corporate procurement, so when companies buy products and services from other companies, less than 1% of that goes to women entrepreneurs. And this is causing a $12 trillion loss to the economy overall. And just to be clear, this 4% for female entrepreneurs, we're not a niche. Women are literally 50% of the population. We need a whole rethinking of how we're doing things here. So I would posit around all of this, we made this up. We made up this economy, we made up the society, we made up the rules, we made up the systems, and we can change them. And it's really time that we did. This is my favorite quote from Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So I want you to think a little bit about the work that you do in the world, the leadership, for the young ones in the audience, what you're going to do with your life. How can we rethink the system that we're in? How do we do that? We're so set in this mindset of, well, that's the way it is. But when you hear this, I hope that you'll step back and think, well, what if it wasn't? What if it could be different? What if we could find another way? How do we make this model that's not working for all of us obsolete? And this is a challenge I took on after I'd done multiple startups and thought, how do I solve this problem of getting capital into the hands of female entrepreneurs? What is a new way of doing that? And it really starts with a totally different philosophy. We're in this place of winner takes all. What if we weren't? We're in a place where we have scarcity. We don't think we have enough, but literally we found enough money in 3 weeks to bail out banks that could have created a lack of hunger for 600 years. Moving from scarcity to abundance. How do we do that? These are a number of the different philosophies that I think through in all of our work. So how do we move from everything being a transaction, what do I get out of it, to a relationship where we are actually humans? We've literally removed humanity from the equation of almost everything we've got out there. And it's just What do I get from you? What do you get from me? So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey to another society that existed before we were here on Turtle Island, North America. When the white man came over to North America, we were given gifts by indigenous people who were here, because gifts are a way of creating a relationship, and that they wanted to be in relationship with us. And we did something incredibly curious with these gifts. We held on to them. And in their society, that's not what you did. You accumulated things, and then you had a huge party, and you gave them all away. It's called the potlatch. You know, potluck, that we talk about, potluck dinners? The potlatch was an economic model where people accumulated, they went out and they traded with each other, and when someone got too much, they would have this huge party and give it away. So it was constantly in flow in the community. So this idea of having to hold on to capital and accumulate it for ourselves because we're so worried about not having enough is a very new construct. It's not how indigenous economies worked. And so I think one of the things that we need to start to do is really look back to other societies that had other ways of organizing that lasted a lot longer than we have. So the capital in flow is something that I started to think about. What if money was actually in flow, in cycle? Because money is currency, current. It's energy. It's not meant to be stagnated and held. It's meant to be in flow. So that was one part of this model. And the next part was this concept of radical generosity. Radical generosity, does anyone know what radical generosity means? It's kind of like, what is that? So I stepped back and thought, what are the biggest challenges that I've seen in business? And one of the big ones is, it's just business, is an excuse to treat people quite poorly. Oh, it's just business. But it's not just business, we're humans, we're in a relationship together. That's a kind of crazy thing, who made that up? And so I started thinking about, what if we were actually nicer to each other? I know, this is like, I can hear my brothers going, wah, wah, really? Like, that's nice. It's business, it's strong. But what if there was actually this environment where we were more generous with each other, where when you stepped out and you suggested something, people would lift you up and help you? And then I thought, exactly what I said earlier, if you just use the word generous, it doesn't really sound that exciting. And this is a part of the challenge that we have in our world, where our language really locks in our behavior. There is no, I can't go home and say, I was so generous today, and have people go, rock on, sister. That doesn't really work, right? You go home and you're like, I killed it, I crushed it, I nailed it, she rocked it. But that language is all about war and sports metaphors. There's no strong word for being great with each other. So I thought, what if I could put a word in front of generous that would get people more interested in what it meant? And so I came up with this concept of radical generosity. And when you think, I don't know what that means, that's exactly the point. If you want to create new behavior, you have to create new language. And so by creating this concept of radical generosity, the idea is, imagine if you were surrounded by people who said they were going to be radically generous with you. Would you dream a little bit bigger? Would you step a little bit outside your comfort zone and maybe try something new? I think the only way to really reach your potential is to be surrounded by people who lift you up. It is absolutely brutal to live in a world where people are picking at you all day, telling you every single thing that's wrong with you. It's so hard to reach your potential in that manner, especially for women. And so this concept of radical generosity is core to what we've built with GEO. So we have capital and flow, a concept of radical generosity being in this values-based. And then there are all these amazing assets in the world that we're not really using. Women make 80% of purchasing decisions, 80%. If we decided to start supporting the kinds of companies that create a better world, we could literally shift the economy. And we sort of nod and go, yeah, I know that, but really 80%. It's incredible. And on top of that, we're accumulating wealth. Women are going to inherit 75% of the largest wealth transfer in history. So we have money like we've never had before. So I started putting this capital and flow, radical generosity, the buying power of women, and designed this whole new model of how we can start to support female innovators to create a better world. And the idea is that 500 women come together, minimum of 500, they contribute $1,100 each. It's called an act of radical generosity. You don't get your money back. It's not an investment. That money is loaned out at 0% interest to female entrepreneurs that are voted for by the 500 women online in a very simple process. That 0% interest loan is paid back over 5 years into the fund, and then it's loaned out again. So we're creating this perpetual fund that we will leave for our daughters and granddaughters and nieces for generations to come. And on top of that, the ventures then get support. The women-led ventures get support from the 500 women on their team. So you go from this place of feeling like you're in scarcity, alone, really hard to get help, to all of a sudden having 500 women helping you. So just think of how you could take these models and start to use them in all other parts of society. We have all this excess capacity of 500 women who really have all kinds of expertise to help these 5 ventures to get them going. Let me give you an example of some of the things that are out there that you've never heard of before, that are under the radar, that are great innovations that haven't been able to get funded because most of the funding is not going to women.
Traditional mobility devices emphasize the disability. They're designed to move the body from one location to another location, but they're not designed for the user experience. So I started realizing that what I needed to design was a vehicle for social change.
This may sound a little dramatic, but my life changed.
Yesterday, as we're walking, we're actually walking side by side, and that hasn't happened for a long time.
So this is a woman who designed a rethinking of the walker and the wheelchair. She was walking through the park with her mom, and her mom said, "Over my dead body, am I ever going to use one of those?" Someone hunched over. Anyone else relate to that? And so she thought, how do you solve that problem? Like, how do you not have people hunched over? You need to be at eye height. And then how can it be something so cool that everybody wants? This is a big thing because people who are in wheelchairs or in walkers get excluded very, very quickly. The first thing we do when someone loses their mobility is send them down a level. They sit, we look down at them, all of a sudden there's a loss of dignity almost immediately. 80% of people in wheelchairs are depressed. There's nothing wrong with wheelchairs. But there are lots of people, 50% of people in wheelchairs can still move their legs. And we have no device for them. So she designed this device that you sit on, it stabilizes your core. So if you've got Parkinson's or MS and you can't be stable, you sit on this, you're stable, and then you move it with your feet. And part of the things that happens is when you start to move it with your feet, you create more muscle mass. And you start to move on your own without having to have someone push you or to have really strong arms. And the early results of what is happening with this bike around the world, the people who have been stuck in wheelchairs and able to move their legs are now moving. They're going on 3-mile walks. They're going to the mall by themselves. This is the kind of thing that if we look at what we've got in society, how do you rethink these things? When you get underneath some of the challenges we're facing, this is a great example. Another one is an Indigenous woman from BC, Patrice Musso, who had a daughter that was born with extreme eczema. And 20% of the population of the world has eczema. I had no idea. And so when she tried to go to the doctor to solve for the eczema that her daughter had, all of our eczema creams have steroids in them. And she didn't want her 6-month-old daughter to have steroids on her body. So her goal was to go out and figure out how to solve that. So she went out, she talked to elders, she went out into her community and started researching. And she found these 5 plants. They're all organic. You could actually eat this stuff. It's completely natural. And she made a mixture, a salve, in her crock pot in her kitchen, because of course, where do we start our businesses? In our kitchen with the crock pot. And she put it on her daughter, and within a day, all of the eczema went away. And she was so blown away. She went onto Facebook and she said, "Does anyone else want to try this? It's really worked for my daughter." and a number of her friends came forward. It worked. Then she made 3 crock pots. Now she's in 680 stores across Canada and starting to export around the world. Again, real problem that someone was facing. There's a new study that just came out last week that said that only 2% of female entrepreneurs start their business to make money, and only 15% of men start their businesses to make money. Most of us go out there to solve a problem that makes us crazy, that is ours to solve in the world. It's not about greed. It's about really solving problems in new ways to create a better world. The last example that I want to talk to you about is a woman named Toni DeRosier from Victoria, BC, who designed breathable food wrap. All of our wrap is toxic and plastic. When you wrap an avocado, it turns brown immediately and it starts to die. When you wrap it with a Bigo, it stays green for 4 days. It's made out of beeswax, it's washable, reusable, and it lasts for 18 months. Every woman in our network was like, oh my God, sign me up. Avocados are expensive. Where do I get this? These are the kinds of things that are all around us. So I would encourage you to please look in your communities, look around you for the amazing business ideas that are out there, get behind them, lift them up and support them. We need this leadership now. Imagine if you were surrounded by radically generous people. How would you act differently? How would you lead differently? And how would you use your leadership in this incredibly important moment in our time? Thank you.